morning. Rabbi Coonan is going to watch the clock so that we can consistently keep this in 20 minutes. It's very, very difficult to do this. I want you to know it's very difficult because there's so much that comes up and so much is experienced in the process. And I don't know what Rabbi Cunan's experience is, but my experience is there's so much left unsaid. There's so much that needs to be said about this, that it's so much more than just Levy and myself having this conversation. This conversation is at the heart, I feel, I'm impelled to feel, is at the heart of every single human being on the planet. And it's because we're not having this conversation. We're not creating the room to have this conversation. We don't even know that we need to have this conversation, that the conversation just doesn't go in any direction that it could possibly go. So to me, as I'm experiencing this, I'm realizing that had I had this conversation even before I was bar mitzvahed, yes, especially before I was bar mitzvahed, at the age of 13, as a young Jew, that my entire life would be different. My entire life, these 83 and a half years, would have been completely different. Had something happened in that moment that drew me to it in a way that I was never drawn to it. My wish, my hope in these 20 minutes, again and again and again, candidly, is drawn to it. Because I long to be drawn to it. And not to being a Jew, drawn to that deeply spiritual life that my life has felt to be, but all the time knowing it's not. And so I'm having this extraordinary opportunity to say good morning to Rabbi Levi Coonan and to ask Levi Coonan to share with each and every one of you what this means to him.
Yes, you know, Rabbi Michal, first of all, it's again great to be here with you. And it's another blessing, another day. And Baruch Hashem for that. And I'm saying it's another day, although it's another day that this is posted. But I say that because I live with the absolute hope and possibility, and God willing, that in 2 days from now, you know, we'll be in a situation to continue doing this, keeping in mind what's going on out there with the virus. So taking every moment and cherishing it and realizing the beauty of it and being alive in it. Yes, this conversation, Rabbi Michal, it awakens in me something also. Many things, but one of them is in 1965, the Rabbi, who we briefly talked about, sent my parents to begin Chabad in California. And when they came, they were like aliens. Get this, it's the 60s. It's California. Need I say more? The 60s plus California, or religious Jew had, you know, the whole deal. I gotta explain myself. And the Rebbe sends them to go to California. And the Rebbe says, this is an incredible time right now because the hippie movement, they're open. They're open to that which is, you know, outside of their context, you know? And indeed, many of those people of the hippies that came to learn Hasidus were so blown away by the teachings of Hasidism, it moved them and touched them, and it changed them. And they changed their course in life. I know one of them who actually, I got a text from last night, who got a high degree. He was on his way to get a master's, and then he had long hair down to his waist. And today you wouldn't recognize the two pictures, but the guy, brilliant guy, and he discovers these teachings, and then he gets so inspired he wants to get on a trip to Israel and just wants to learn more about it. He's like, I've been thirsting for this. I want to run for it. I want everything about it. And actually, the Rebbe told him he should finish his master's and get his, because he thought for sure the Rebbe would say, jump into it, man. Leave college, leave your degree, forget it all. God will provide. But instead, the Rebbe instructed him to complete his degree, and it's been very helpful to him in many, many different areas. But here's the point that I want to share, is that the Rebbe sent his people around the world and they continue to go out to be able to be there for that bar mitzvah boy. So at that time they can have an experience, at least to get an idea of what it is to have that connection to the neshama, to the soul, at an age where the mind is still not corrupting it as much as it does as we get older. Because as we get older, we become full of ourselves more and more. And the more full of ourselves
we got what?
We become more full of ourselves. We become more content with how we understand the world. And that's the greatest obstacle to growth. So younger children they're naturally wired in, and we're all naturally wired in, but they don't have the obstruction of that which occurs as we get older, and our the inflated of our ego gets bigger, So anyway, that's at the same time, Hashem placed you on your path and me on mine in this lifetime. And for divine providence, that's your journey. And here you are.
And there you are.
I mean, there's so much that you wouldn't have done that obviously that there's, for some reason, this is the journey,
Yes. I want everybody to know that the austere gentleman behind me is the Rebbe that Rabbi Coonan is speaking about. That picture was given to me by JLI, the Jewish Learning Institute, I believe is the name.
Yes.
When I spoke at a JLI convention, which is populated by all the shluchim, the rabbis. And that happened after I became aware of Chabad. This was now 7 or 8 years ago. And it was Levy Coonan who called me and said to me that they'd been reading my book, the Emyth Revisited, and they were very interested in it and would wonder if I'd come meet with them to talk about it. And so I asked him some questions about who he was and why they were interested. And he said, well, he explained who they were, Chabad, et cetera, and so forth. And they were the heads of Chabad houses in Orange County and Los Angeles County, et cetera. And I said to him, well, why are you interested in the Emyth Revisited? And Levy said to me at that time, I don't know whether you recall this, you said, because it's obviously been influenced by Torah. And I laughed, just as I did then. And I said, but I've never read Torah. And he said, well, you didn't have to. You're Jewish. And it's, in fact, deeply embedded in everything you talk about. And I said, well, that's astonishing to me. And he said, so would you come meet with us? And I said, sure. Which was my way, and that is my way today. Would you come meet with me? Sure. Who knows what's going to happen? And I did. And I don't know if I told you this story earlier in this conversation, but I did go to meet with, and I believe there were 9 rabbis like Levy Coonan. They're called shluchim. There in that meeting, all austere in their black felt hats and their beards and their payas and their black suits in the Chabad house in Irvine. And that immediately was a strange experience. But we began a conversation. So tell me about who you guys are, essentially was the conversation, because I had no clue who they were. And I didn't study before I went. People ask me, did you do the research before? I don't research anything before I go anywhere. I just go. And I don't know why that is. I just go. And so I go for the experience. And the experience was talking to these rather austere looking gentlemen who weren't austere at all. They were just cute and funny. And as I got to know them, rather hilarious, and deeply, 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 deeply religious. And I remember the time, the moment in that conversation when Levy spoke about the Rabbi and how they all came together and how all this happened. And he started to cry. And it wasn't just crying. He started to, in my recollection, sob. As the memory, the recollection of the Rebbe, the experience of the Rebbe came upon him. And it just touched me, just as it's touching me right now. Just as it's touching me right now. Something that's inexplicable to me. Just as it's touching me right now. And my voice inside of me said, so this is why you've been doing the work you've been doing to me. So Michael, this is why you've been doing the work you've been doing, and you never knew it. And I realized, hear me, this is so strange to say in a way, I realized that I'd been called to do the work I'd been doing just for the sake of every Chabad house on the planet. And that wasn't my ego. That was my soul. And I'm feeling it even now as I say it to you. So that's why we're having this conversation. That's why. How's the time?
Just enough for me to share with you a short story in response.
Okay.
You know, I got a little verklempt when you shared that because I remember that moment deeply too. And it was and it remains in my memory. And when I go back to it, a moment of realizing that all of that which the Rebbe has placed on our shoulders collectively to be doing so that we can have the world of the future where there's no war, there's no jealousy, and there's no hatred, is really something that we have to get and take that in a deeper and deeper, deeper way. I just wanted to share with you a story that I heard from one of my teachers, who was a chassid in Russia during the time of the KGB, when it was illegal, or at least that's what they said. They didn't allow Jews to study Torah or to gather together to do anything Jewish. So one time they had a little Hasidic gathering called a Farbrengen. Google it. Farbrengen. And they had a Farbrengen, and their little gathering, and they had two guys watching, and that just in case they hear anybody at the KGB, they'll tell them, they'll break up. They had a plan. Meanwhile, the guy who's leading this little gathering, he's in his heartfelt moments, and he gets so emotional, and he starts to cry, and everything's going well. He's crying about, why are we not doing this, and why are we not doing that, and he's getting all verklempt. And suddenly, the two guys who were on watch came running in and said, shoot, I think we see how people, and boom, they all split, they ran into different locations. When they found out that it was a false alarm, and they got back together, he said, my teacher told me, his teacher was the one that was leading this little gathering, said, I just learned a lesson like the Baal Shem Tov tells us. He says, look, before we're sitting around, we're crying about this and that, and then suddenly with the snap of a finger, we snapped into action. So he said, the lesson is we have to always be in action. And as our shows always end, the way that we activate that neshama, that soul that you just so wonderfully shared, is by activating the soul within us, by each of us realizing that there's something about us at this very moment that's a gift to somebody else. And activating that, even if we're not in the mood of it or whatever it is what activates the connection that we're talking about, the connection to the neshama. One act of goodness and kindness.
Well, thank you, Levy. I believe you did act then, before we ended that meeting, by putting tefillin on me. Do you remember that at all?
I do, and I remember the dance afterwards. Remember we danced afterwards because it was your first time.
It was the first time putting tefillin on me, and nobody here knows what tefillin is. Well, I'm saying nobody knows. Of course, everybody knows what tefillin is. What do I know?
I sent a picture to you so you can put it into the video, so you can see a picture of you putting on tefillin.
So wonderful. So how much time do we have left?
I think we're out. I think we share a closing statement.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for spending this time with us in this conversation between a practicing Jew and a wandering Jew. Both Jews nonetheless. And perhaps those of you who aren't Jews can begin to experience what it means for a Jew to be a Jew, and suddenly discover that in reality, every single human being here on earth has been touched by the one who's created us, we Jews, to be Jews. And in the process of experiencing that, something remarkable will occur. With love. See you tomorrow.